No one expected the quiet life of a man in the dust of Haran to change the course of history. Abraham had known hardship, but he had never imagined that a single voice could shatter the certainty of his world, leaving him trembling with a mixture of fear, awe, and impossible hope. His home was humble, his wealth modest, and his family small. Yet in the simplicity of his existence lay the quiet strength that the universe had been waiting for. Life flowed predictably, tending flocks, negotiating with neighbors, walking the familiar paths carved by generations before him. And yet, all of that was about to end. It began as a whisper, almost imperceptible against the desert wind, yet it carried a weight that pulled at the very marrow of Abraham's bones. Leave your country, your people, and your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. The voice was not a shout, nor was it a threat. It was an authority that bent the air itself, a command woven with the soft certainty of something eternal. Abraham's heart stuttered, disbelief warring with instinct. Leave everything he had ever known, everything that had anchored him since childhood? The past and the familiar now demanded surrender to the unknown. He stood motionless for what felt like hours, the sun a merciless witness overhead. The flocks grazed nearby, unconcerned, as if life itself continued in ignorance of the weighty moment unfolding. And yet, Abraham could not ignore it. It was not merely a voice. It was a call to destiny. His mind raced through memories of his father's house, of the city's bustling streets, of his kin who depended on him, even as he had learned to lead in humility. The voice returned, patient, unwavering, almost tender. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. Your name will be known to generations yet unborn. All peoples of the earth will find blessing in you. Faith and fear collided in Abraham's chest. The promise was monumental, ungraspable in its vastness. A nation, generations, blessings reaching across the world, and yet the call required obedience first. Leaving everything familiar behind without a map, without a plan, without even a hint of what lay ahead. He looked at his wife, Sarah, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Her hands, gentle yet strong, held the life they had built together, fragile against the tides of destiny neither could fully understand. Lord, Abraham whispered, voice cracking, if I go, if I trust, will you truly guide me? The air was silent but alive, as if the earth itself held its breath. And then it came again, a certainty more potent than fear. Go, Abraham. I am with you. The decision tore through him like a storm. Abraham could feel the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders, ancestors buried in familiar soil, neighbors relying on familiar comfort routine. Yet here was a call that demanded courage beyond measure. He knelt and prayed, pleading for wisdom, asking for assurance, knowing that hesitation could cost him the very thing the universe intended. And in that moment, he realized a truth he had long ignored. Faith was not the absence of fear. It was a surrender to a promise that defied understanding. He rose with resolve. Abraham gathered what he could carry, packed provisions for the unknown, and turned to Sarah. She, too, would follow. Her trust was unspoken, yet fierce. Together, they prepared to leave behind all they had ever known. The city streets, once familiar and safe, now felt like a cage. Every stone, every whisper of the marketplace reminded Abraham of the life he was leaving, yet each step away was a step toward the destiny he had yet to see. As night fell, Abraham looked back one final time at Haran. The glow of fires, the distant hum of voices, the structures of a lifetime now felt like a memory slipping from his grasp. He did not weep for the past. He did not tremble for the unknown. But somewhere deep inside, a knot of fear twisted in his chest, a reminder that surrender always comes with cost. And yet, he knew that in obedience lay life, and in trust lay the seeds of something far greater than he could imagine. The journey began at first light. Abraham, Sarah, and their small household of servants and animals moved steadily, the horizon stretching endlessly ahead. Days blended into nights, and nights into days. Every step tested their endurance. Every harsh desert wind a reminder that they were leaving safety for faith. And yet, Abraham felt a strange peace, a thread of certainty that grew with each mile. The promise was invisible but palpable, and it guided him forward like a quiet flame in the dark. But the path was not without peril. Marauding bandits, harsh deserts, and scarcity tested their resolve. Sarah's fear sometimes flared into doubt, and Abraham's own heart wrestled with exhaustion and despair. They walked through valleys of shadow and over hills where the sun scorched their skin. Yet the voice remained, echoing in Abraham's spirit. I will be with you. Trust me. It was enough to keep them moving, even when hope seemed a fragile ember flickering against the wind. One evening, as the sky burned with the color of molten gold, Abraham paused atop a ridge and looked down on a river valley. The land stretched fertile and vast, untouched by the hand of man. It shimmered with possibility, a promise yet unclaimed. And there, standing beside him, Sarah rested her hand on his shoulder. Her gaze followed his, eyes filled with longing and fear and wonder. Abraham felt the weight of his decision again. The unknown loomed before them like a living thing, hungry and indifferent. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and Abraham heard a whisper carried on the air, not loud, not commanding, but intimate, almost urgent. Here will I show you the land. Here will I begin what I have promised. He exhaled slowly, the tension of weeks releasing in a single breath. The promise was real. The journey, perilous as it was, held purpose beyond the limits of human understanding. But he also sensed a truth more unsettling than fear. The covenant would demand more than travel and trust. It would demand obedience that stretched beyond comfort, sacrifice that tested the heart itself, and courage that defied the limits of imagination. Abraham's eyes traced the distant hills where shadows stretched long and the first stars began to emerge. Somewhere in that vast unknown, his destiny waited. And yet, he could not ignore the uneasy feeling curling in his gut. The world was not empty. Forces he could not yet see, human pride, envy, doubt, and danger lurked ahead. The path would not simply be a straight march toward promise. It would twist, it would challenge, and it would test the very fiber of his faith. As the last light faded and the night settled around them, Abraham camped with his family beneath a canopy of stars that seemed to stretch infinitely. The desert whispered secrets older than memory. He thought of the generations yet unborn who would hear his story, who would come to know a promise fulfilled across centuries. And in that stillness, Abraham felt both the weight of the world and the fragile hope that his obedience might shape it. Then, in the stillness, a new thought struck, a shadow of warning that tinged the edges of his hope. The journey was not just toward a land, but toward a destiny that would demand choices no one could foresee. A test that would stretch beyond survival, beyond obedience, beyond life itself. And somewhere in the distance, a figure he could not yet see would intersect with his path, a choice that could define nations yet unborn. Abraham's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and wonder. The stars above seemed to pulse, echoing the call that had started this journey. And he realized, with a shiver that ran down his spine, that the story had only just begun. What lay ahead was not merely the fulfillment of a promise, but confrontation with forces of faith, doubt, and destiny that would challenge everything he believed, and perhaps everything the world believed. Somewhere in the silent night, a whisper carried on the wind, almost teasing, almost foreboding. Abraham, the first step has been taken, but the hardest choice is yet to come. And with that, he understood. Leaving Haran had been just the beginning. The stars flickered overhead, the fire burned low, and the world waited, breathless, expectant, and unknowing of the trials, triumphs, and heartbreaks that were about to unfold. The years pressed on, heavy with expectation and longing. Abraham and Sarai had walked deserts, crossed valleys, and pitched tents beneath endless skies, yet the promise seemed distant, almost cruel in its silence. Sarai's heart ached with the knowledge that age was pressing in, her womb long empty despite prayers whispered beneath the stars. And in that quiet despair, a plan was made, one born of human impatience, not divine instruction. Hagar will bear a child for you, Sarai said one evening, her voice tight with hope and fear. The Egyptian servant girl, young and timid, looked up at Abraham with wide, uncertain eyes. The man of faith swallowed hard, caught between obedience to God and the counsel of his wife. He hesitated, but love for Sarai, loyalty to the household, and a desperate desire to see God's promise fulfilled nudged him toward action. Hagar would carry the weight of their hopes, even if the future remained uncertain. When Hagar conceived, the joy of potential life was quickly shadowed by tension. Sarai's hope twisted into jealousy, pride into resentment. She scorned Hagar, her words sharp, her glances like daggers, and the girl, once timid, began to shrink under the weight of scrutiny. Abraham, torn between compassion and loyalty, watched the household fracture, powerless to soothe the growing storm. "You are my servant, yet you carry my husband's child," Sarai hissed one day. Hagar's eyes filled with tears, but there was defiance there too, a spark that refused to be extinguished. She fled into the wilderness, the sun beating down on her shoulders, the wind whispering through the dry grass like a chorus of judgment. Each step carried fear and hope intertwined. Fear for her life, for the child she carried, and hope that somewhere, somehow, God's hand would guide them through this lonely desert. It was there, alone and desperate, that the angel of the Lord found her. Hagar, trembling, sank to her knees, her hands pressed against the parched earth. "Do not be afraid, Hagar," the voice said, cutting through the wilderness silence like a lifeline. "God has heard the voice of the boy. You shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your affliction." Tears streamed down her face, relief and fear tangled together in a single breath. She rose, lifted her head to the sky, and felt a strange, unshakable strength settle over her. She would return to Abraham and Sarai, carry with her not only a child but promise. A reminder that God's plan often moved through human hearts in ways they could not understand. When Ishmael was born, his cries echoed through the tents, a sound both fragile and fierce. Abraham held him close, marveling at the miracle of life, while Sarai's heart twisted between relief and unease. Hagar watched them both, understanding the delicate balance of hope, jealousy, and fear that would shape their lives. Ishmael, with eyes dark and observant, would grow knowing the weight of destiny, even before he understood the fullness of his father's covenant. Yet even as Abraham loved Ishmael, the promise he had been given remained focused elsewhere. God appeared to him once more, reminding him of the covenant, the lineage through which nations would rise. "Sarai shall bear you a son," the voice said, "and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him and his descendants forever." Abraham's heart ached with joy and sorrow intertwined. Joy for fulfillment of God's promise, sorrow for the tension it would sow in his household. The years that followed were filled with both laughter and unrest. Ishmael grew strong, clever, and spirited, but always aware of the delicate threads that bound him to Abraham's family. Isaac, the child of promise, came later, and the household became a web of love, rivalry, and divine destiny. Hagar, protective and proud, watched her son navigate this world with a quiet resilience born of both struggle and blessing. Abraham loved both sons, yet the weight of the covenant pressed upon his soul like a shadow, shaping every choice he made. And then, one day, the tension could no longer be contained. Sarai, now Sarah, saw the future she had long prayed for realized in Isaac, and fear gripped her heart. Fear for her son, fear for promise, fear for the path God had laid out. "Cast out the bondwoman and her son," she said sharply, her eyes hard. "They shall not inherit with my son Isaac." Abraham's chest tightened, torn between loyalty to Hagar and obedience to God. His heart broke, but the voice of God settled him, whispering reassurance that justice and promise were entwined in ways he could not yet see. With a heavy heart, Abraham rose before dawn, gathering bread and water for Hagar and Ishmael, sending them into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on their backs and God's protection as their shield. Hagar, trembling, embraced Abraham, feeling the weight of grief and hope in equal measure. "Do not weep for me," she said, her voice strong despite tears. "God is with us." And indeed, even as the desert sun blazed down, they felt it, an unseen hand guiding them, a promise that would not be broken. In the wilderness, Hagar and Ishmael wandered, unsure where the path would lead. Their food ran low, their water nearly gone, and despair threatened to overwhelm them. But the angel of the Lord appeared once more, calling out from the sky, "Lift the boy up and hold him. I will make him a great nation." Hagar's heart trembled, a mix of relief and awe flooding through her. The boy, eyes wide with understanding beyond his years, clung to his mother, sensing the gravity of the moment, sensing the invisible hand that would shape his destiny. As they settled near a spring, life became both struggle and survival. Ishmael grew into a young man, skilled and resourceful, but always aware of the covenant that defined his father's household. Abraham watched from a distance, his heart torn, knowing that Ishmael's life would be blessed yet complicated, touched by God's hand yet marked by human sorrow. And so, the story of Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael unfolded, a tale of faith, obedience, promise, and human weakness intertwined. A child born of desperation became a man of destiny, a reminder that God's plans often move through hardship, tension, and tears. The covenant pressed forward, unseen yet unstoppable, shaping generations yet unborn, even as the shadow of rivalry and challenge loomed in the household Abraham had left behind. And in the quiet of the desert night, as stars glittered like shards of heaven across the black velvet sky, one question remained, whispered on the wind. How would these intertwined destinies shape the nations to come, and would faith endure when the test grew unimaginable? The answer waited beyond the horizon, in the hands of God, in the courage of Hagar, and in the spirit of a boy named Ishmael, a question that would not be answered until fullness of time.